Are you sure this is the resting place of the great evil?
Well, it's the only dungeon for miles.
We've searched almost every room, Bertrand.
That just means we're close.
Rabble. I like eating babies.
Let's keep looking. Those were just fodder.
Yes, they weren't even three-dimensional.
I found a secret door.
Well, that's a big one.
I don't know if this is a battle we can win.
Arr. Ah!
Hi, Hunter here. Today I'm here to talk about Tiny Dungeons 2nd Edition. It's a 2018 game by Bahr and Gallant Knight Games, based on Tiny Dungeons 1st Edition by Brandon McFadden, I guess. As you can see, it's an adorable little 5.5 by 8.5 form factor book. I think that's really cute. Sometimes these are easy to hold in your hand, and I think it plays on the theme of tiny dungeons, tiny book. But my partner does hate this form factor because it doesn't match a lot of the other books in my collection. So it's a bunch of standard 8.5 by 11s, and then you get to something like this. But this is similar to form factors you see with Fate and with like Powered by the Apocalypse books and that kind of thing. So I guess it's just in style for light TTRPGs to go smaller rather than like the standard size. When we start out with the art, I note that it's pretty simple, but it also works pretty good. It's nice and clean. It has a slightly cartoonish tinge to it, but I think it's very appropriate. I liked it, no complaints. It is a touch redundant because you will see throughout the book the same picture over and over and over several times. So they clearly had a limited asset repository, and they made the most of it. I guess we'll include formatting in the art category. I did notice some typos and a few broken sentences that like didn't fit anywhere else, probably from formatting and shifting content around during production. It's not a big deal. It wasn't super distracting, but you did notice there were some elements of missing polish in the text. If you're familiar with 5th edition, I think you'll be familiar with this. It's not 5th edition. It's a whole heck of a lot simpler than 5th edition, but like it's got, to me, it's got a very similar feel, just pared down drastically. The core mechanic is that you roll 2d6s, and if you get a 5 or a 6, then that's a success. You get advantage on a roll, then it's 3d6, and if you have disadvantage on a roll, it's 1d6. It does not have any stats, attributes like strength or dex or whatever. Instead, you have traits that mark you as getting advantage on strength-type checks or dex-type checks, that kind of thing. So first you pick your species, which comes with a set hit point total, as well as a racial trait, or species trait. Then you pick your language and your weapon proficiencies, basically. And one of those weapon proficiencies, you get to define a weapon that you have advantage with when using it. And then you pick 4 traits. And traits are basically like racial abilities and feats. They're really feats, but like include some things that you might think of as stats or racial abilities. Then you pick some gear, and then you're done. And that's the real feature of this game, is that it's very quick and easy to build a character. Now this game, distinguishing from some others, you have a low hit point total coming from your species. You can boost that a little bit with traits like toughness. Tough, not toughness. You can boost that a little bit with traits like tough, but you don't ever get a huge pile of hit points. But that's okay, because according to the base mechanic, not the optional rules, every attack basically does 1 hit point worth of damage, if successful. There are some monsters that do 2 hit points of damage, and a couple of traits that like let you circumstantially do more damage, but essentially you're doing 1 point of damage with an attack. And so your hit point totals are never growing very large, and the damage that you're dealing is never growing very large. I will say that I don't think that the light mechanics are balanced very well. There are some heritages, species, races, whatever, that are like way better than others, way more optimized. And I know optimization isn't the point here, but as an example, there's the tree folk who get 9 hit points, which is a lot of hit points in this game, but they can only heal when resting or very slowly regenerate in direct sunlight. And they cannot be healed with magical healing, which I think is a huge disadvantage, like crippling. So compare that with the Salamar, which are salamander folk. They can heal any damage that they would take from natural fire. Instead, they heal. So you have one heritage that can barely heal circumstantially, and they have a bunch of hit points, and then another heritage with slightly fewer hit points, like 5 instead of 9, but they can heal at their own pace, right? You just cover yourself in lantern oil and run screaming into battle, and you've got regen as a Salamar. So obviously I don't think those are anywhere near balanced. You also have things like some of the traits are clear winners compared to other traits. You have the tough trait, which gives you 2 hit points. And 2 hit points is not a negligible amount to get. And then you have the diehard trait, which is basically just relentless endurance from the half-orc in 5th edition. When you get reduced to 0 hit points, you can knock yourself back up to 2 hit points once per day. So, like, oh, I got knocked down, now I have 2 hit points again. And that's just worse than tough all around, because tough gives you 2 hit points that can be healed repeatedly throughout the day, and they don't require a special thing to track, as opposed to diehard, where it's only once per day, and you have to keep track of it. And I know there's, like, in theory, this edge case where the spillover damage might be lost. If you, say, have, 2 hit points, and you have toughness, so when you take 5 points of damage, it reduces you to 0 and you're just down. Versus you have 2 hit points, and you take 5 points of damage, and you have diehard, so you go down to 0, but then come back up to 2. Except all the attacks do 1, maybe 2 points of damage. So that spillover effect is never going to happen. So it's just an inferior trait to tough, but with additional homework on top of it. And you notice that kind of throughout the rules, like these little character option traps and these places where this thing isn't quite as good as this thing. And I don't think that's a supreme deal breaker. I think that would be a problem in a long-term campaign. So I don't think this is much of a game to run as your daily driver game, but I think for the simplicity of it, it'd be great for a pickup game. If you're all hanging out with some friends and you're like, oh man, I really wish we could play D&D right now, but we don't have our regular stuff prepared, I think this would be great to sit down and whip out in 15 minutes a bunch of characters and do like a light game. But I think if you were playing your characters repeatedly over and over and over, you'd notice a lot of places where the rules don't really stand up, they're not really polished, they don't fit together well, all the characters kind of seem like they play the same, and I think that'd be a problem over the long term, but you wouldn't notice that in short term thing. It's just the problem with light rules. You can have it really simple and easy to get into, or you can have it cover a lot of different things in specificity, but you don't end up with this, you're not going to get both. That really impacts the monsters section, because it has a selection of generic monsters in the book to work with, but they are pretty generic. They're not very interesting, and their stats are really boring. And what I mean by that is you will notice that they don't have any real unique rules that govern any of the monsters. They all kind of are the same monster with like a different description added to them. One of the things I don't mind that's simple about the monsters is that you basically just decide however many hit points you want the monster to have based on the importance of the monster. It's not a very important monster, it's a minion, it gets 1 hit point. If it's a epically dangerous boss monster, it gets 16 hit points. That kind of thing. And I don't mind that. But that that really highlights the problem of them not having enough to put into these monsters to make them interesting, because a lot of these monsters have traits. They have the same traits that player characters would have, but the traits don't really make sense for a monster. A lot of these monsters have the tough trait, or they have the die-hard trait, or they have both traits. And the problem with that is you're already deciding, hey, this monster should have X many hit points. That's a perfectly fine and valid way to do that. But also, there's no need to give them the trait, have 2 additional hit points, because you already decided however many hit points you wanted them to have. It kind of harkens back to 3rd edition D&D, where they, all the monsters would have the toughness feat. And they might have the toughness feat multiple times, stacking on top of each other. And that at least made some kind of sense, because those monsters, went through this formula process to derive their exact stats and, how much hit points they should have. The toughness feat could, goose that formula a little bit. But here, the tough trait does nothing on these monsters, but take up page space. And kind of, they're just desperate to have more stuff to put on these monsters, because the monsters don't have much going for them. And it also leads to weird inconsistencies, like the fire giant has the strong trait, which gives them advantage on strength-based checks. Makes perfect sense. But, there are lots of other strong monsters that don't have the strong trait. Are the dragons not strong? Is the T-Rex not strong? Is the bridge troll not strong? Especially in comparison to your player characters. So, it just makes more sense to be give them advantage when they should have advantage, rather than list all these traits that are kind of redundant. They're transparently filler for the stat blocks. I don't want to rag on this too much. I've already ragged on it too much. Because I don't think it'll be a problem in light play like this is designed to be. But it's a very noticeable thing. They could clear up a ton of these stat blocks if they're doing a 3rd edition of this. And not include that extraneous information. Springboarding off of that, I mentioned the T-Rex, and there are a lot of dinosaurs in here. Dinosaurs are a big filler monster in this. I think there's 14 pages of dinosaurs in a 190-page book. So a lot of dinosaurs. I think one of the micro settings that I'll talk about in a bit is a dinosaur themed one. And so I think maybe they wanted to make sure they had enough dinosaurs, and maybe they commissioned some art, and they're like, by gum, we're going to use this art that we commissioned. But there's too many pages of dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are not that interesting. Most of the dinosaurs have the exact same tail slap ability. The raptors have the same tail slap ability with the same power behind it as the T-Rex, as the Brontosaurus, etc. It was not worth the page count, because I didn't need all of these. Thanks. Especially not with how boring they are. And that kind of brings us to the best part of Tiny Dungeons 2nd Edition, which is the micro settings. The micro settings are basically tiny little sampler settings supplied by the Tiny Dungeons community. So they have a wide range of authors, and it really takes up more than half of the book. And it's really the part that I enjoyed the most, because the rules for Tiny Dungeon, they're fine, whatever. It's easy and breezy to read through. But I enjoy that anthology effect of reading through different creators' ideas and perspectives on things, and what they think would be a neat game, and getting suggestions. And that kind of really percolates my mind in terms of I almost never read one of those and I'm like, I want exactly that. But I often read that and I'm like, ooh, I like that, but then I could take it this direction or that direction, and etc. And I really enjoy that. And underrated thing for TTRPGs, I think, but that's something that is kind of like a solo play element as well. I'm not in a currently existing game. I'm between games, so I'm not putting anything together for consumption by others, and I'm not otherwise engaging my creative juices. But that's something you can sit down with a TTRPG book, flip through, and still derive pleasure from, still get enjoyment out of. And I think that's really underrated, and this delivered on that a lot. I will say that some of the micro settings are really more like premises or prompts than they are settings. Some of them are just imagine that you put together a type of game that's like this. And they really aren't They really aren't settings. But all in all, I really enjoyed it. I think it's the best part of the book. I really feel like this game would shine if you were all hanging around with friends and you really wanted to play D&D or play some RPG and you wanted to scratch that itch, but you didn't want to sit down and do the massive effort of creating a all new cast of characters or trying to like craft an adventure that fits your 15th level adventurers. I think it serves the same purpose as other light games that I've seen before, like Kobolds Ate My Baby or Elves or that kind of thing, where it's just have a few beers, play something that's not very serious, doesn't take a lot of commitment. It's so simple and easy. I really feel like you could get new people into the hobby with like a pickup game using something like this. So here we are to the TLDR. I really tried to keep it short and sweet this time because I thought the last one was really overly long. I want to hit a couple of highlights and then I'll let you go. Decent production values. It's not intimidating. It's fun and easy to read. It's well suited to casual play or a spontaneous game. But there's not enough meat or polish for a campaign play.